Okay, next step would be to create a custom user model. Okay, so the default Django user model makes use of the username as the primary identifier for each user, which doesn't coincide with our business logic. Okay, so we want the email address of each user to be this primary identifier. Okay, so we're going to create a custom user model for our Django project to allow us to modify stuff. It's usually advisable, even if you want to maintain the default Django config of using usernames, that you create your own user model. Why? Because it allows you to make changes in the near future without like breaking things. Okay, so with the custom user model, you'll be able to create migrations, okay, and change fields on your user model without having to perform manual transforms. Okay, so we go to create the user model. Okay, our website, first of all, I changed the CSS of the background and the font style. Okay, so we go to accounts, so that's under apps. And we're going to create a new user model. Okay, so first of all, we import the base user model, the abstract user model, and we inherit it. So the abstract user model is basically a base that Django provides whenever we want to create our own user model. So it makes it a lot easier for us because it comes with some predefined fields. Okay, so it comes with all the password logic, all the username logic, first name, last name, etc. So we just need to basically fine tune how it behaves. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say that the username field should equal to none. Okay, and I'm also going to say that the email field should be unique. Okay, obviously it can't be blank, so that's the default. Blank is false, null is false. Okay, and next thing we can do, if we had any other thing, maybe we wanted to add a phone number, we could maybe add phone number with character field. Okay, but then basically we still need to perform some sort of validation to make sure that it's an actual phone number. So that's basically how you can add any other field you want to your user model. But for our purposes, this is okay. We can now go ahead and tell Django that our username field or our primary identifier for our custom user model is the email field. Okay, and you can say required fields is none or email. Okay, so by default the username field is going to be required, so you can just see that none, there are no other required fields that are required from the user when creating this field. Next thing we want to do is to create some meta attributes. Okay, so first thing, we want to tell Django to order our user model based on email because the default ordering is based on username, and that is going to raise errors. Second thing, we want to change the verbose name, which is the name that shows up in the user admin, from custom user to user model. Okay, so it's going to show as user instead of custom user. Okay, so we're just about done with that, but then the problem now arises because we need to create a custom user manager, okay, for our custom user object, because the default Django user model or Django user manager won't work with our model because we removed the username field. So we're going to go ahead and create a new file, managers.py. Okay, and we want to first of all import the user manager base class. Okay, and we can go ahead and create our own custom user manager base class, or custom user manager. Custom user manager, the base user manager So what do managers do for us? Managers are what we call basically that perform creations, retrieving models from the database, etc. So we have to create our own custom user manager. Okay. So def create user, which is the function called whenever we want to create a new user. Okay, we're going to accept an email, a password, and some extra fields which are just keyword arguments. Okay, and you can basically say create, so I'm just adding a bit of documentation, create and save a user with email and password. So this is how you would create documentation for your function. Okay, so you can say if not email, raise value error, email is required, is a required field. Okay, we can also go ahead and say so first of all we normalize the email address, which means we basically validate it to make sure it's accurate. Okay, next we get the user model basically, which is our custom user model, because that's going to be the object we assign this manager to, and we pass in the extra fields. Okay, and then we say user set password, and we save the user and we return that user. So this is basically the workflow that's going to happen whenever we create a new user using our objects class, our custom user manager. Okay, and we can create another function basically when we're creating super user. Okay, so almost the same thing as previous, just that in this one we're going to switch we're going to basically make sure that the user is created as a super user. Okay, so create super user with email and password. Okay, and we can say extra fields, so we want to make sure that it's set as a super user. Okay, so the first thing to make sure is that it's set as a staff. So each user object or each user model has the attribute is staff, which basically means whether they have access to the admin site. And when we're creating a super user, we want to give each of them access to the admin site, so we set it as a default to true. So extra field is going to be a dictionary, so we use the set default attribute. Do the same for the super user and also for is active. So these are all fields that come with the abstract user model that we're overriding or extending in our custom user object. Okay, I'm just performing a bit of validation here. We want to raise a value error if the user specifically sets the super user is staff method to false, because each super user should have the staff attribute set to true. Okay, same for super user field. And we're just about done. We can return self create user, email, password, and extra fields. Awesome. So that's our custom user manager for our custom user objects. Okay, and we go back to our ERD. Yeah. Okay. It's not here, but then I expect our user to have a slug field. Okay, so a slug field is going to be able to basically we'll serve like a sort of username. Okay, we'll use it in our URLs to be able to retrieve all of the users questions basically. So we use it for user profiles and dashboards. So it will be a sort of human friendly identifier for user accounts, but it wouldn't be a username per se. Okay, so most websites allow you to create like a default username for you. We're going to also mimic that by allowing users to leave it as blank. So when they leave it as blank, we create one for them. Okay, and that's just all we have to do for the slug field. Okay, but then we have to add or perform the attributes of creating a default slug for each user. Before we get to that, we want to create a string representation for the user model. So basically this is just a human friendly way of specifying the user model, and just return the user's email address. Okay, and then we can import our custom user manager. Okay, and we say objects is equal to custom user manager. Okay, now we get to the part of creating a default slug/username for users if blank. Okay, so to do this, we're going to need to override the save function of the class. Okay, it's going to accept other arguments and keyword arguments. And what we basically want to do is perform some logic here, right? That basically checks for a slug. If not, create one, and finally save. Okay, so we can get to the finally save part by just calling super.save args quarks. Okay, so what does super do? Super basically calls the inherited function. So we're inheriting abstract user, okay, and we're creating our own class. So we've overridden the save function, okay. So by calling super, we're basically going to call abstract user's own save function. Okay, so that basically allows us to pass all the save logic back to Django to handle. So we can interject, perform some basic functions, and then pass it back to Django to handle. Okay, so let's basically perform some logic that checks if a user has a slug. It should be very simple. It's going to be if not self.slug. Okay, we now create one. Create default slug. Okay, and we want to create our slug basically based off of our first name. So we want to create our slug based off the user's first name and the user's last name. Okay, and these are just default fields that come with the abstract user model. Okay, so first name, last name, they are strings. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to make them URL safe. So we'll have to import slugify. Okay, and slugify is just going to make it URL safe. Okay, but then this raises the concern: what if two users have the same first name and last name? What happens then? Okay, so we need to create a way to basically generate a bit of entropy here. So we need to create like a random ID to append to this string. Okay, and the way we could do that is creating a new function, okay, that just spits out a random string. Okay, and we're actually going to create that right now. So we create a new utils.py file, okay, and we just want to create a function def generate random ID that returns a string, random string. Okay, so let's flush that out from UUID import UUID4. Again, we can allow the user to specify the length of the random ID. By default will be 5. So UUID just returns a unique identifier. Okay, so it's basically like a random hash, and then we can just convert that to a string and get the length we want. So it's highly unlikely that two users will generate random ID is ever going to generate the same ID twice, but we still need to check for that condition. Okay, so if not self the slug random slug is equal to slugify plus, so we need to import that from dot import utils. Util generate random ID. Okay, so we generated a random slug, but we need to still make sure that no other user has that slug. Okay, so we can just do a while loop that repeats until we find the slug that no other user has. Okay, so while custom user dot objects dot filter slug is equal to random slug dot exists. Random slug, we repeat the operation. Okay, and we can finally go ahead to say self dot slug is equal to random slug. Okay, so while this is fine, so this is fine actually as it is, but then I think we can put all of this logic inside a separate function. So it would be like a generate random slug. So and you could just put all this logic there. And then we just call self the slug is equal to self generate random slug, which looks much nicer. And if we had other logic in our save function, it wouldn't look too cluttered. Okay, we have to remember to return random slug. Alright, so we are done with creating user model and creating a custom user model manager. Okay, you could have written, while tests come much later, we can actually write them now to make sure we've gotten all our logic down correctly. So testing makes us, or allows us to basically cross check that our work works, okay, without having to manually open the browser and browse around and try stuff. Okay, so we can usually with Django comes by default, each app comes with a test.py file. Okay, but then a much better structure would be to delete this file and to create a new folder called test. Okay, and under that we have an init.py file and test models.py, test urls.py, and also test views.py. So you make use of them as meets your use case. Okay, and we basically each model is just, or each test case is like Django's it makes use of the default Python unit test module, okay, but then we add a bit of extra logic on top of that. So Django provides this test case module for us that automatically creates a standing database and allows us to basically test stuff in a database that doesn't affect our production database. So from Django.test import test case plus user manager test, okay, and it inherits test case. So first thing we're going to test is that we want to test that create user works as expected. Next we want to test that create super user works as expected. Okay, yeah, so these are the tests for our custom user manager. Okay, so let's get to it. By tests are just really pieces of code that just run in their own environment. Okay, so we can import all the usual Django functions and models and just perform operations in them. Okay, so first of all we want to get our user model. Okay, so we can use the Django contrib dot get user model function to get our user model. Okay, so it's much easier than importing from .models import custom user model. Okay, and then it's also much easier to basically it's much more flexible in case we decide to change our model name. Okay, so user is equal to get user model. Okay, but then we haven't yet added our user model to our settings.py. Okay, so if you remember, we have created a user model, we have created a user model manager. Next step would be to register that user model manager in the project settings. Okay, so that's very simple. All we have to do is we have to go to anywhere actually works. I just like to create a new setting basically under authentication, just by authentication, and we call it auth user model is equal to accounts.custom user. Okay, interesting. So I think Django didn't identify our user model now, but we try that again. Python manager by check. Okay, we haven't yet applied any migrations. I'm guessing the database picked something up, so I can just go ahead and delete it again. Python manager by make migrations. Interesting. Google search. We have added what user model. So our settings. or maybe we add that on top of this. Or user model. Okay. Wow. So it was the last letter. Small letter L. Change that to big letter and we are good to go. And we want to migrate basically. So we have created our user model and we have made those changes, reflected those changes on the database. So we can actually go ahead and try to run create super user and see what happens. So it prompts us for an email, which is very good. Let's use sean@email.com. Enter password. Awesome. So that actually works. We can try to log in on the admin page. So john@email.com, my password, and we're in. Okay, you can notice that our user model isn't showing here because we didn't register that on the admin.py file. We're going to change that in a bit. Okay, but let's go back to writing test. So to test. Okay, so under test model. Interesting. Should be here. Okay, and we want to basically get the user model, which will be our custom user model. Okay, and then what we want to do is create a new user. So user.objects.create user. So we're testing that create user performs as we expect it to. Email is equal to user@email.com. Password is equal to any string, so full will work. Okay, and we want to basically assert that our user was created successfully. Okay, so self.assert equal. Okay, assert equal user.email normal or .com. Okay, so Django test case supports two different types of asserts for equality. There's the assert equal and there's the self.assert equals. Okay, so what's the difference between these two? Because they are not equal. Equals basically performs its comparison using the equality sign, that's double equals. Okay, but equals performs its own using the is Python keyword. Okay, so that's just the basic difference. So whereas this is basically, so we can use self.assert equal when we want to check the content of two elements, and you can use set.assert equal so when we want to check that two objects are directly equal to each other. Okay, so for our purposes, self.assert equals is sufficient. Just want to assert that user was set as active. Okay, I also want to make sure that he wasn't given unnecessary permissions. Okay, so user is not a staff and user is not a super user. Awesome. Okay, next thing we want to check is that we get an error when we don't pass in the right amount of values or in the right order basically. So user.object create user. Okay, so we didn't pass in any of the parameters that are needed. Okay, and we should get a type error, so we're setting that erase the type error. Okay, same thing for Okay, so self dot search raises when we don't perform, when we give an invalid email address. Okay, and we also want to assert that there's a value error. So this will be a type error because password is null. Okay, and then we want to make sure there will be a value error when the email address is invalid. Awesome. So that's the whole wrap of things for test create user. Let's go ahead and write test for test create super user. Okay, so basically the same thing, just now we're going to make sure that the right permissions are given. Okay. Okay, and we just perform basically the same asserts. You can replace all of this with admin. Should be super user. So the user should be a staff, so this should be true. And you should be a super user, so this should also be true. Awesome. So these are all the tests for our custom user manager. We can go ahead and run them using manager by test apps.account. So we can specify the app to test, and all of them passed. Awesome. So we know that our manager is working as expected. You can now go ahead and write tests for our model. Okay, because remember we added some unique behavior to our model. Okay, so we basically told it to generate random slug, to require basically it's the slug we want to test and the representation of the model in the admin. Okay, so we can write a new test class custom user model test case. Okay, and I'll just go ahead to copy that from here. Okay, so first thing we do is we test that the user slug is unique. Whenever we save a user object, we make sure that the user's slug was saved uniquely, and whenever somebody tries to save a user with the same slug, we raise an error. Okay, integrity errors, so that will be from Django db.details. Okay, and for our string representation, we just make sure that the user's email was returned. So when we call string on user, we get the user's email. Test user slug is generated if blank. Okay, so we want to make sure that a random user slug was generated if no user slug was passed in by the user. Okay, and then we also test user slug is not overwritten. So when a user actually saves a slug with their name, we don't overwrite it. Okay, and we can go ahead and test that as well. Awesome, so all our tests are running, and We are good to go. Next, so we just want to mark this as complete. So our next point of duty would be to create custom user, create and change forms. Okay, so why do we need to do that? Because we have created a new user model that has some new fields. We basically have to tell Django how to interact with that user model. So we create a new forms.py from Django .contrib.auth.forms import user change form and user creation form. So this behaves almost like a user forms a model form. Okay, all we have to do is to tell it our own model. Okay, we could have also used the get user model from contrib.auth Django.contrib.auth. Okay, but in this case I feel custom user is better. And we specify a list of fields, okay, that should appear on the form, which in our case will only be email. So if we had like maybe email, phone, favorite color, okay, we'd put all those fields here. Same for user change form. Okay, and we can go ahead and add this to the real reason why we're trying to do this is so that we can add it with our admin file. Okay, so from import model and from Django.contrib import admin import user admin. Okay, so admin the register models of custom user. Okay, so it appears on the admin side now. That's what we want to do, and we will register it to the custom user admin that inherits from the user admin class provided by Django. So first thing first, we want to specify the forms that we use to create the user and to change the user. So from import forms. Okay, and next thing we want to do is to specify the field sets, which are the fields that appear in our Django admin page. Okay, so first one is email. Next should be their first password should appear. Okay, and we can add another actually. So let's add details. Okay, and the field under here should be first name, last name, and slug. Again, another field to show the user's permissions. Is staff and is active. Okay, so we can fire up our server. Awesome. So we have to also specify a custom ordering for our admin page. So ordering email, and that fixes that. So we load this and we see our user model with the name users. Okay, and we see username, email, first name, last name, staff status. So we can actually change this to only show the user's email, staff status, and support status. So we can change that in this display attribute. This display equal to email is staff is active okay, and is super user. So all our fields change now. We have the email address, the staff status, the active field, and super status field. Okay, and we should be able to search as well. Okay, so we also have to specify search fields since we are making the default Django admin. Awesome, so that works. Perfect. So, and if we view our journal email, that's our user model, we see all the fields we declared. Okay, so email, password, first name, last name, slug. Notice that the slug only has the random ID because the user doesn't have a first name or a last name. We could actually change this to Johnny. Okay, and this will be like his username for the website. Now we can save that. Interesting. Seems we made a mistake somewhere. Okay, final steps. So we have our admin page. Let me go ahead and run the server again. But I made a mistake with the add form should be a creation form and each form should be changed form basically. Yeah. So now when we reload, we get this basically, so you don't edit the password directly. And we can change this log now, I believe. Awesome, that works perfectly. Yeah. And you can also add a user. Okay. So you basically have to change that to this. Okay. So that brings us to the end of add user. Of custom users basically. Okay, and we can stop the server and push the GitHub basically. Git add all, git commit, I'll just dump all of this right there. And git push version master.